Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Noel, founder of the Intuitive Divorce, and I am here popping on right after class with my fabulous team member, Jo Young, who is an amazing coach. She is our, I guess, the guardian of our boundaries and keeps our nervous systems regulated. And wow, speaking of boundaries, we had an amazing, amazing, powerful class today. So we are literally popping in like just moments after with our after class musings. And this is,
I'm buzzing with
I
boundaries.
know, buzzing with boundaries. Well, I mean, it's such a big topic. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
Joe is so well versed in this and also teaches her own course on this. But just this is just such a powerful and meaty topic, and it's so important for helping mamas navigate just really their own experience and their divorce and model for their children. And we literally we could have gone on and on and on. We're like, we got to get off and do our after class musings for our other mamas.
That's right. That's right. Boundaries is such a big subject, isn't it? Like it encompasses how we live, I mean, it's huge. How we experience life, how we make choices, all of it. I mean, it's such a big subject. And so to bring it into class is always like, whoop, we got to back way up. And as I told the mamas today, begin anew, like start
Mhm.
to think about boundaries in such a different way than how you have in the past, where boundaries felt restrictive and isolating and all the things. So let's get into it.
As someone actually mentioned today in class, it's like boundaries are a buzzword. Everybody's talking about boundaries. We know we need boundaries, and yet it's like boundaries. I don't want anything to do with boundaries. They feel, but it's because of how we've perceived it. It's because we've got all these preconceived notions. Well, mamas are so well versed in keeping the peace, avoiding confrontation, making everything okay, reading the room, and at what price and what cost. And particularly when it comes to divorce, it's a moment of tremendous vulnerability about the unknown, about all that's coming up. And it's kind of like one of those places where it's like, oh, it's like the last thing I want to lean into right now. And yet, leaning into it will transform the experience of your divorce, will transform the experience of your life going forward. And yes, it's probably going to take a little rewiring because going back to that notion of preconceived notions and the assigned meaning, many of us, myself included, at times have looked at boundaries as something that is, if I feel powerful, I'm taking the power away from someone else, or I'm crushing someone else, or they're going to be mad at me, or whatever. So,
Yeah, boundaries have gotten a bad reputation, is what I will say, because I
mhm,
think that people in the past have mistaken boundaries for what I call manipulation. When we're
mhm,
trying to control someone else's behavior by setting a boundary, that's not really a boundary. That's manipulating someone else. And
mhm,
boundaries are not about changing anyone else. The way that I like to think about boundaries and that I encourage the mamas to think about boundaries is a boundary is really about you and you. I was trained by a beautiful boundary woman, Nancy Levin, and that's a term that she coined, was that boundaries are between you and you. And I love that. And it's so true. And what that means is boundaries are not about changing anybody else. They're about showing up and being aware of a situation and asking ourselves, what do I need to take care of me in this moment? What boundary do I need to put in place so that I am taking care of me?
mhm.
And, it's just a different way of thinking about it. And I loved your little image of class today. So Kristen sends out a little image to all the mamas before we enter class. And today it was an image of all these doorways. And when we can reframe boundaries from being these walls that we erect, right? In the past, it's like, I need to put up a wall, I need to build a boundary, I have to protect myself, I got to keep these things out. And instead, we look at them as doors and say, what if a boundary could look more like, who am I letting in? How am I letting them in? How can I let people into my life and show them how I want to and deserve to be treated? And when
Mhm.
we start to think about boundaries like that, all of a sudden it completely shifts. It shifts how it feels in your body. It shifts how we communicate them, and it makes them so much easier to maintain.
And it's like we always say, everything really boils down to awareness, right? Being aware of what can I control? What can I change? And how can I mitigate the suffering here for myself?
Yeah.
So that's really where putting healthy boundaries in place, it's like we all know, especially in a divorce, what's going to create a runaway train,
Yeah.
right? Where can we put a healthy boundary in that's just an interruption? It's not about crushing the other person. It's not about changing the other person. It's not about an expectation of the other person. It's saying, this is what this is what my boundary is. This is my expectation of self. I am no longer available for. I am no longer going to communicate in this way. I am no longer blah, blah, blah.
It's so important. I mean, we started today just outlining a definition of what boundaries are, and they really are, for those of you listening, the things that we will and will not tolerate, the things that we will and will not accept. Essentially, it's what's okay for us and not okay for us. And it's really important to discover that for yourselves. So many times, Kristen, and we heard this from the moms today, we're so programmed to always be looking outside of ourselves. Is everybody okay? I don't want to cause conflict. I want to be the peacekeeper, the person who holds the household together. I'm the person who shows up and does everything at work, right? I'm the person in the family that brings everybody together, whatever it is. And it's like the problem with that, because there's many beautiful things about that, and it's important to recognize that. But the issue becomes when we leave ourselves out of the equation.
Mhm.
How many of
When
us
we
are
don't, let's
taught?
say, how does that role feel for me? Do I
Yes, when
want to
we're
play
not
that role?
taught to check
Right.
in and go, okay, my knee jerk reaction all the time is to say yes. And as women, we're especially conditioned to do this. Can you help out? Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to do that? Yes, yes, yes. We are yes people because number one, it's often an expectation, particularly an expectation we put on ourselves. And it's like, before you say yes the next time, can you just pause and ask yourself, is
Mhm.
this something I desire to do? Because honestly, if it's not coming from a place of desire, when we say yes, when we want to say no, guess what happens? We build
It's not
resentment,
good.
we get angry, we get frustrated, all the triggers, right?
Resentful.
It's like we're
Resentful.
resentful. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so, even just taking the moment to go, I know that this might not be practiced, but I have to learn to check in with myself to say, how do I feel about this in this moment, rather than just rattling off a yes.
Right. Well, the fact is, we're not only setting ourselves up poorly, we're setting up the person that we're in relationship with poorly.
That's right.
We're setting everybody up to fail. I'm saying yes to something I don't want to say yes to. So then I'm going to be really resentful and bitter and angry at you. But I said yes. So whose fault is that?
Yes.
It's sort of like that. So
Yep.
it, well, that's what I love about it. If we can just have the grace to reframe and start somewhere. And we had these beautiful, beautiful shares today.
Mm,
Different examples of
mhm.
how do I set a boundary with my soon to be ex when he's taking the kids for the first time, but they never have what they need? How do I set a boundary with my child who is mimicking bad behavior that they're witnessing? They're witnessing the way dad treats me. So we had all these incredible examples come up today that we workshopped because that sort of dissects it a little bit and makes it not such a big topic because when we start small and we start in a place where we really get clear on where do I want to say yes? How do I feel about this? What can I do in this moment with this person, with this situation, and change the setup for myself and for them? And when
Yeah.
you start with those little micro nuggets and examples, that's where you start to build on it. And again, pretty much everybody is uncomfortable with boundaries initially until they start figuring out how to implement them. And they actually realize, you know what? I can set a boundary in a way that I actually feel good about.
Yeah, absolutely. I said today it's a little bit like showing up for the gym the first time, right?
Mhm.
It's like when I show up for the gym and I start to work a different muscle, it's going to feel sore and it's going to feel awkward and it's going to feel hard. But
Mhm.
guess what? You show up the next day and you do it again. You show up the next day and you do it again. And eventually it just becomes an automatic thing. And I remember when I first was introduced to boundaries 10 years ago, I guess, from this perspective, almost it's been. It's like, I remember thinking, how in the world will I ever do that? I don't even know what I want and desire. And it was like, that should have been the first clue.
Well, that's because we jump in and just say yes before we actually think about it,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
It's just
So,
like, I am a yes machine.
right. And now I don't think twice about it. It's just the way that I live my life. And I don't have to set boundaries very often because I already make it very clear how I want to be treated. I choose
Or,
relationships and people that are going to be in honor of that now.
and when we're in discomfort, we stop and we say, what's going on here? Where, and usually at the root of that is like, where did I betray my own boundary? Or where did I not set a boundary?
Sure.
Somehow it always goes back to boundaries.
That's
Um,
right. If
and you know,
you
you,
are feeling resentful, if you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling a lot of anger and frustration, those are all really good indicators that there's a boundary that needs to be set somewhere. And so, just like every single thing that we talk about in this class, awareness is the first step.
Mhm.
So, how do I start to become aware when those things are popping in? Oh, where is there some kind of boundary that I need to set here? And what are some questions that you can ask yourself in doing that? It's like, what am I tolerating that I no longer want to tolerate? Where am I saying I want things, but I'm not taking any steps to attain them? Where
Mhm.
am I accepting behaviors and things that I no longer wish to accept? Right. And so, and then you get into the whole beautiful way that you can communicate boundaries. And I loved it today when, and it always is surprising when I say to people, what if you could think of boundaries as the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for other people? Because truly, it really is. It takes the guesswork out of relationships. People know how to show up. They know how to support
Well, you
you. They
say
know
that all
how
the
to be
time.
there for you.
You tell mamas all the time, we have to show people how to treat us, right?
Because if we don't, they decide for
Right.
themselves.
And we also have to accept when people show us how they're going to treat us, when people show us who they are, how they're showing up for this divorce, how they're going to be in this negotiation, how they're going to co-parent or not, how they're going to treat me. We have to believe them. But just because they've chosen that doesn't mean we have to choose the same. And we can easily put a boundary in place. Well, I shouldn't say easily. Well, it is easy. It is easy to just, it's just a new language, maybe a new language initially. But it's so freeing because the moment you realize, oh, I just avoided a lot of chaos because we know, particularly in relationship with a husband, we know what the triggers are. We know the likely outcome of a conversation or an argument or a battle or whatever it is.
Yeah,
So if we do something different, if we choose to handle it differently, if we choose to say, I'm no longer available for that, it stops
yeah,
it. And it doesn't mean that, particularly when you've been in a relationship with someone for a long time and you change the rules of engagement, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to like it. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to listen to it initially. It may mean that you just have to keep reminding them. But eventually, remind them, remind them. Don't let them wear you down. Just remind them, remind them, remind them, remind them. And eventually, it's like, oh, they got the memo. They
yeah.
got the
They're like,
memo.
wow, she actually meant what she said. How
She
about
meant what
that?
she said. But
The
that's what
most
really takes.
important part to me too
Mhm,
around, well, one of the most important parts about setting boundaries really is about the relationship that it builds to yourself. It's
mhm,
like, think about how many times we put our needs, desires, wants, if we even consider it, on the back burner, right?
mhm,
So boundaries gives you a chance to show yourself that what you think matters, what
mhm,
you have to say matters, how you're going to show up matters. And
mhm,
so it's such a beautiful way to build self esteem, to build a relationship that you have to self, because that's something that no one, no other situation can rock. Once that's built, that solid foundation, there's no shaking that. And
mhm.
so, I love the fact when you think of boundaries is boundaries are what keep that in place,
Mhm.
how I want to be treated, how I'm going to show up, and how I'm also going to treat other people in return. I shared the story
Mhm.
today when I first started setting boundaries. One of the first ones that I was like, oh, I know when I need to set. I'm no longer going to tolerate anyone who speaks to me unkindly. And it was like, huh, wow. And you know what I realized? The person who spoke to me the most unkindly was myself, my own self talk. And so I had to start with me first. And that's a really important
Awareness.
part about
Mhm,
boundaries is most of the time the boundaries we need to set are with ourselves.
mhm,
And so I had to really set a boundary with myself that I'm not available for that kind of talk anymore, Joe.
mhm.
When I
Well,
pass
it's
by the
it's the
mirror,
getting
there's not
clear,
going to be any more
right?
critiquing. It's going to be only kind things because
Mhm,
that's what I'm willing to accept into
mhm.
my life.
Getting clear about what you need. First of all, realizing you're worthy of needs,
Mhm.
getting
Yeah.
clear about them, and then what boundary could I put in place to support it? And how am I going to stick to it? And I know it's going to feel a little uncomfortable at first, but like, even just breaking it down, texting, texting with your ex can become a runaway train. That can just become a spiral down, emotional, triggering. Shut it down. Find a way, and you just say, okay. And also, I always encourage, regardless of who you're dealing with, I always encourage collaborative communication, sort of like an invitation to your ex. Regardless of how we ended up here, let's not rehash that whole thing. I know we both want what's best for our kids. So this is an invitation for X, Y, and Z. And let's keep our communication to child focused decisions. Let's not talk about,
That in and of right there is a boundary,
right,
right? We're going to set a boundary with each other that I won't communicate about anything other than what's best for our children. And
right.
I'm asking you to do the same.
Meet me in the field, right? And the
That's
bottom
right.
line is when they deviate, remind them.
Remind them.
I'm sorry, I'm no longer available for that. Let's keep it focused to blah blah blah. They
And when
deviate.
you deviate, remind
Exactly.
yourself,
Exactly.
because it's not about showing up and being perfect. We're making a change, right? We're pivoting from how things have always been and we're moving into a different direction.
It
So there
opens.
has to be
Mhm,
room for grace
mhm.
and for mistakes, right?
For the
So
messy
take
middle,
two. That's
right?
right.
We're
For
in
the
the
messy
messy
middle.
middle. Right. And there's a lot of opportunity in there because you like you said, really this journey is you and you. Because it's really the only thing you can control. So you're deciding how can I show up for this? How can I show up for my kids? How can I show up for this divorce negotiation? And one exercise that I always like to bring people through is imagine being on the other side of your divorce. How do you want to remember yourself? And how do you want your children to remember you? And maybe even how do you want your ex to remember you? I mean, you're right now, your present day choices are changing the course of your story. And they do matter, even if it's not met by the other person. We don't know. The story isn't, it's a dot, dot, dot. It's still unfinished. We don't know how it's all going to end. The way someone's treating you right now is not necessarily the way they're going to treat you forever. However, you are going to set a boundary to protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is said if you want a crystal ball into your future, pay attention to your present day choices. And the other
Mm,
thing to remember where boundaries are concerned too is that you are modeling for your children. When you change the rule of engagement with your children or anybody, they might not like it at first because guess what? We've spent years putting that in place. Well, now we want to change things, right? So it's going to feel a little uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, don't you want your children to also know how to set boundaries? To go, what I want, what I think, what's not okay for me, I need to be able to communicate that. They're watching. They're watching every move we make and everything we say. So, learning how to set boundaries is not only crucial for you, but it's really crucial for teaching your kids a very vital life skill.
Hmm. Well, honestly, we could talk about this forever. It was so powerful. It was such,
Mhm.
I love when you teach boundaries, Joe.
Me too. Get so
Let's,
excited.
I know. She's a boundary nerd. What can we say? You know what? Why don't we share? I think this would be a good place to end because otherwise we'll go on for 3 days. But why don't we share just maybe a prompt that we could leave mamas with today who are uncomfortable with boundaries, really don't know where to start? Like what, I loved how you ended our class today. Would you share some of that?
Yeah. So, like we said, the very first thing is awareness. Where am I tolerating something that I don't want to tolerate anymore? Where am I feeling resentful or frustrated or exhausted? Where is there a boundary that I need to put into place? So the first step always is awareness. And when we're aware of that, it's like take a moment and have some grace with yourself and realize that up until this moment, I haven't been ready. But now that it's in my awareness, I'm ready to do something about it. So, what I said to the moms, the first thing to do is to ask yourself, why haven't I set that boundary yet? Become aware of the excuse
Mhm.
behind it because our excuses can keep us trapped and frozen in time. They become the self saboteur, right? So, if the excuse is, I don't want to cause conflict, it's like, okay, that feels like a valid excuse. But what's the cost of not setting the boundary? You're the one that's taking the hit. So, knowing what our excuse is and what's holding us back, am I going to stay stuck in that excuse or am I going to no longer be willing to take the hit? Right? Like, make the choice for yourself and just say, what is one small thing I can do to move in the direction of what it is that I need in this moment?
Mhm.
Just one
Yeah.
small step, because that's how we build the
Where am I
muscle.
missing? Where am I missing a boundary? Where
Mhm.
where would I be well served to implement a boundary? And
What's holding me back?
what feels squirmy about that? Why is it holding me back? What are the excuses that I'm telling myself?
Okay. Because they're
And
just
what,
stories.
right, that keep us stuck
Mhm.
and they're not real. And what could I do to move that needle? What
Yeah.
one little thing could I move, at least just to feel like because it doesn't feel good when we know something and we deny it.
Yeah. Yeah. But we have to be clear about what we need in the moment, right? That's the other piece of it is what do I actually need here so that I know what boundary I need to set?
Do you want to
You
give an
know,
example from class today?
we
What
can.
about
Do you have one that's
what
popping
about
up for
yeah,
you?
well, I mean, we'll keep it really simple because what about the mom who, and I think I mentioned this briefly, but who was she's starting to, they're transitioning the children from house to house. They're going to start this co-parenting back and forth. And the first thing she said, and they're little. So let's be clear, because it's very different when your kids are teenagers and they're little. This involves diapers. So immediately she's starting to get full of anxiety, like, well, I don't think he even has X, Y, and Z at his house. So, what's the best setup and way to implement a boundary to support her through that?
Yeah. So we talked about what was her need in that moment. And her need was to make sure that her kids had what they needed, that her
Mhm.
kids had as much similar to at her home so that there was some consistency when they go to dad's for the first time. Right.
Mhm.
So when she asked her ex, her soon to be ex, he didn't have the things that he needed. And so she said, how do I set a boundary around that? And I said, well, you have a couple of options. But how would it feel? Because you have always been the one to provide all those things. We can't magically think that the dad, even though he's a dad, is going to know what the kids need. Because
Mhm.
guess what? You've always done that. You've always taken care of that. So now that things are changing, could you make a list for him? Could you say, these are the things that you need to have at your house? And once you have those things, then the kids would be more than happy to come and stay with you. That way she has peace of mind. It's
Mhm.
not about taking care of
Mhm.
him. In fact, we
Right.
said, make it
That's
very clear that I'm giving you a list and you need to go out and make
right.
sure that you provide these
Right.
things.
This is the distinction that let's really point that out. There is a distinction here from her now having to micromanage two homes.
Right.
Basically, what
Right.
she's saying, and also this is collaborative, it's an invitation. How can I help? I know this is a difficult transition. How can I help set you up? Would it be helpful if I give you a list? Would it be helpful if we had, separate items, respective homes? I'm not doing this on the weekly, but how do we get through this transition? That actually is self-care. It's
Yeah.
not about taking on the role. I know you did all this before, but you're just setting yourself up well, and you're allowing for some grace for that to get implemented. And you're taking care of your kids. And by the way, you're taking care of your ex, who will be taking care of your kids. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. We're always looking for the win win for sure.
You're
And
always looking
again,
to
it's
win,
not about taking care of him.
right?
It is about setting yourself up so that you know when my kids leave this house and they go to dad's house, they're taken care of.
Hmm.
That's the focus, right? That I know that they're going to be okay. So I can sleep at night. So,
And
yeah.
let's also just say, and then we'll leave it at this, but it's like also boundaries can morph. So
Mm,
the boundary that you put into place now, you may loosen it, you may strengthen it, you may build upon it. And you also may say, like, listen, here's the list. These are the things that the kids need, but I'm out after this. I mean, you're going to have to do you. And like, if you're missing X, Y, and Z, don't call me. You know where CVS is. Yeah.
right. Right. So the biggest takeaway from boundaries really is that it is about what you need to take care of you. What needs to be put in place so that no matter what somebody else is doing, no matter what the situation is, what can I do to take care of myself?
Mhm. And be
Because
clear
as we
about the
say,
why, right? Be clear of the why beneath it. Like, why am I doing this? Why do I need this? Why do I need this
right,
because of the role that I'm playing, that I'm addicted to, or I'm afraid of a repercussion or whatever? So it's again a lot, harnessing a lot of awareness.
yeah, a lot of awareness, self-awareness.
Mhm.
And once you move into this and start flexing that muscle, you're just going to find that it becomes easier and easier. And like I said, it is the most loving thing you can do for another person because then you're not holding them responsible. You aren't getting frustrated and angry and having that come out sideways. You've actually done your job by taking ownership of the situation and saying, let me take care of myself here. Let me show you what I need, and I'm going to take care of that. So, yeah, it's a beautiful class, and I loved
Amazing.
so many of the examples. But remembering that when we set boundaries, there is going to be a bit of a messy middle when it involves someone else because we are changing the rules of engagement.
Mhm.
We are saying what worked for me once doesn't work for me now, but let me show you what does.
Mhm. And again, that is also an invitation. Anyway, we had this amazing, amazing discussion today, which is actually going to trickle into our class next week. And I'm
Yeah.
always, always in awe of the mamas who show up, who are committed to carving out this time for themselves. It's so important. It transforms their experience of divorce. This isn't woo woo, rainbows and unicorns, something to be saved for later for the other side. This literally keeps them in a different condition so that they can show up for the tough decisions, so they can show up for themselves, for their kids. And it's glorious to witness and walk beside. And we love our mamas.
We
And
love our mamas.
yeah. So thank you for
Yeah.
joining us for our after class musings today. If you want to learn more about us, you can check out our website at intuitivedivorce.com, where there's all kinds of goodies, and get on our newsletter and follow us on social. We're constantly putting out content. You'll also see a way to get in touch with us if you're interested in learning more about us. And for now, we just wish you happy boundary making.
Yes. And if you have any comments or specific questions around boundaries, pop them in the comments and we'll be happy to get back to you.